They thought they had laid the perfect trap. They invited a lion to dinner, then set blood on the table, thinking he wouldn't smell it. In the shadows of West Africa, where diplomacy still wears perfume and a practiced smile, betrayal was already sharpening its knives. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso was, respectfully, invited to Abuja, an unscheduled visit, no entourage, no security. They expected him to land quietly. Isolated. Vulnerable. The plan was simple: surround him under the guise of peace, then pressure him into submission. But when the aircraft door opened, the man who stepped out wasn't him. Because they always forget one thing: you cannot trap a man who's made a home in the dark. And this time, the hunter walked straight into his own snare. The game has changed, and Africa is watching. Ouagadougou. A night without wind. Without warning. The kind of silence that makes your heart beat faster. Inside the presidential residence, Ibrahim Traoré sat alone at his desk. Not unattended, but entirely in control. The desk before him wasn't clutter. It was a battlefield: threat assessments, encrypted call logs, maps of foreign interference, and dossiers of friendly diplomats with hidden knives, each page smoked with quiet danger, the kind only seen by those who know where to look. They thought he would come unarmed. They thought he'd panic. What they didn't understand is this: he is not just a president. He's a tactician, carrying the blueprint of a continent's awakening. So what will you choose? To believe that we are still behind, or that the time has come to define ourselves? Like this video if you've ever felt underestimated. Subscribe if you believe Africa doesn't need to copy in order to create greatness. Because this isn't just the story of Wami, or of Burkina Faso. This is a message for anyone who still carries a dream that others said was impossible. Then the phone rang. The screen read simply, NG. President Ibrahim Traoré paused. His fingers hovered for a beat longer than necessary before he picked up the device with measured calm. On the other end, a voice, familiar, smooth, and carefully lacquered with fraternal warmth, came alive. Brother Ibrahim, how are you? It was Bola Ahmed Tinubu, the president of Nigeria. His tone was genial, his words effortless, but to Traoré, it echoed a rehearsed lullaby, one meant to disarm, not to welcome. Traoré answered not with friendliness, but with a chill that sliced clean through the protocol. He had heard voices like this before. Voices dipped in honey but sharpened underneath like a bayonet. Tinubu wasted no time. The conversation swayed immediately to business, though veiled in fraternity. This tension with ECOWAS, the sanctions, it doesn't have to continue, he said lightly. Let's meet. Just you and me. In Abuja. We sit, we talk, and we solve this as Africans, not enemies. There was a moment's pause on the Burkina Faso end. Traoré leaned back slowly in his chair, hands folded like a general surveying unfamiliar terrain. His eyes narrowed, not in suspicion but in calculation. Like a lion measuring the wind before moving through tall grass. Peace talks, he asked, his voice firm, neutral, unreadable. Tinubu chuckled softly. Yes, yes, of course. Just us. No interference, no traps, no France. Merely a conversation between brothers. But still, silence lingered. Traoré allowed the silence to stretch, his mind already several steps ahead. Finally, he responded, dry, detached, resolute. I'll think about it. The call ended, but the unease remained. Something about the entire exchange rang hollow, as if he had been handed a script rather than an invitation. A performance, complete with the role he was expected to play, the isolated leader walking blindly into diplomatic theater. But Traoré had never been a spectator to deception. He had lived through it, dismantled it, learned its scent. He rose from his desk and walked to the window. The city of Ouagadougou shimmered in the distance, its calm night sky indifferent to the storm now whispering on the lines of power. The president stood still for a moment, reading silence the way others read intelligence briefs. Then, his voice returned, this time not with warmth, but with command. Track all French diplomatic activity in Abuja, he told his intelligence chief. Calm, I want eyes on every unfamiliar face at Nnamdi Azikiwe Airport. Monitor electronic warfare channels. If there's a trap, I want to see it before it's sprung. Understood, Mr. President. And so, as Abuja lit its stage with velvet smiles and hidden blades, they believed they had cast Traore in their play, but they didn't know, he'd already read the final act. Meanwhile, the word of an unofficial meeting in Abuja began to leak through discreet channels. On paper, it was a routine diplomatic mission. The president of Burkina Faso invited to confer on peace and regional stability with ECOWAS counterparts. Yet behind closed doors, a very different script was being rehearsed. The French embassy in Abuja extended its working hours well beyond the usual diplomatic schedule. Unmarked vehicles glided into a restricted aircraft hangar under the cover of night. Nigeria's Department of State Services quietly intensified surveillance around Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport. There were no press releases, no public confirmations, and certainly no room for questions. At the same time, in Ouagadougou, President Traore remained conspicuously mute. No tweets, no photographs, no press statements. His team issued no itinerary. Yet they prepared a private jet, staffed and fueled, for a departure that no one outside the inner circle could verify. It was theater, purposefully opaque. Then, at exactly 11:43 a.m., the aircraft bearing Burkina Faso's flag taxied into position on the runway and lifted off. Headlines ignited across West African news outlets. Reporters in Abuja primed their cameras, eager to capture history, and potentially, a moment of betrayal. The tension crackled through social media. Would Traore step onto foreign soil alone, defenseless, unaware of the trap? But as the jet touched down in Abuja and the hatch began to open, the operation lurched into chaos. Security officers moved into position, prepared to detain the lone passenger. Yet the figure who emerged was not the man they expected. Instead of Traore, poised, vigilant, aware, it was a senior diplomat accompanied by aides, delivering a measured statement. President Traore regrets that he cannot attend. He sends his respects and continues to work tirelessly for Burkina Faso's prosperity. A wave of confusion rippled through the assembled agents. Colonel Bayo's formation faltered. The unmarked vehicles ground to a halt. In the French embassy's command center, laptops slammed shut, radios crackled with alarm. In less than 30 seconds, the confident veneer of the plot dissolved into frantic disarray. Back in Ouagadougou, the screens flickered to life with the live national broadcast. There sat Traore, no medals, no borrowed pomp, dressed in the simple fatigues of a captain, his posture unwavering. His gaze fixed on the camera, he began. They thought they would find me isolated, unprotected, walking into a snare. But I do not answer to traps. I answer to my people. He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to settle. Then he delivered the line that resonated across every African capital. You cannot trap a man who has made his home in the dark. The studio remained silent, not in fear, but in reverent attention. And across the continent, millions watched in real time as Traore produced evidence on screen, intercepted communications, financial logs tracing back to Paris, and time-stamped directives aimed at preventing his departure. By the time Abuja's officials regained their composure, the narrative had already shifted irrevocably. What was intended as a clandestine coup of protocol became a public spectacle of exposure. African citizens saw not a leader cornered, but a strategist who had turned the hunter's snare into a spotlight. In that moment, the game changed. The decoy flight, the silent hangar, the unmarked cars, all laid bare as ingredients of a failed operation. And through it all, President Ibrahim Traoré remained the architect of his own destiny, having transformed a would-be ambush into a moment of continental awakening. In Ouagadougou, as the trap in Abuja collapsed into diplomatic debris, the atmosphere inside the national broadcast studio was one of calm precision. No extravagant stage. No golden drapes. No carefully curated political spectacle. Just a wooden desk, a single microphone, and a man in uniform. No medals. No flag wall. Only cloth stitched with duty, and a spine carved from conviction. President Ibrahim Traoré sat still, upright. His shoulders did not flinch. His gaze did not dart. It was the posture of a man who had seen the knife before it was drawn, and chosen not to run, but to reveal it. He looked into the camera, not with anger, but with truth sharpened into clarity. They thought I would land quietly in Abuja, he began, voice even, steady, deliberate, that I would walk into their net, unaware. That I would face them alone, unguarded, but I do not answer to traps, that I do not answer to puppets, that I answer to the people. And then, with the weight of a pause that made the air in the studio feel heavier, he said the words that would soon echo across the continent. You cannot arrest a lion by inviting him to dinner. There was no applause. No drumroll. No cue for reaction. Instead, silence. The kind born not of fear, but of reverence, the kind that made millions stop what they were doing, not to witness power, but to listen to purpose. Moments later, the screen behind Traoré came alive, not with slogans, but with evidence. He didn't speculate. He didn't accuse without grounds. He showed the world exactly what had been planned. Encrypted messages, audio recordings, financial transaction logs, internal directives stamped with French diplomatic codes, emails sent from Paris to Abuja 2 full days before Tinubu ever picked up the phone. A hush fell across offices, living rooms, classrooms, even radio booths. The evidence was meticulous, damning, and impossible to spin. French agents had coordinated with local collaborators to orchestrate the detainment of a sitting African president, under the guise of diplomacy. The screen now showed a particularly chilling voice note. Ensure President Traoré does not leave Nigerian airspace until full review. ECOWAS cover can be used. Refer to Stabilization Protocol B. Suddenly, millions realized this wasn't paranoia. This was a pattern. A colonial tactic repackaged in modern language. Only this time, it had been caught in the act. And the betrayal? It wasn't just foreign. Because the documents also made one thing painfully clear, this plan required a local partner. Tinubu. The very man who had called Traoré, brother. The one who had said, just us Africans, no France. Now exposed as the middleman, the delivery boy for a scheme soaked in centuries-old arrogance. Across the continent, the reaction was visceral. In Bamako, a youth group climbed onto a rooftop and waved the Burkinabe flag as the speech played through a makeshift projector on a neighboring wall. In Accra, a local newspaper printed the entire transcript under the headline, "The Day the Lion Roared." In Niamey, a market vendor turned off his radio, shook his head, and simply said, "We've been lied to long enough." Social media exploded, not just with applause, but anger, awakening, resolve. One Nigerian student posted, "If our own president can invite a man to be trapped on African soil, then what do our borders even mean?" A popular Ghanaian YouTuber captioned her video. Traoré didn't just dodge the bullet, he held up the mirror. In Ivory Coast, protesters marched silently through the capital holding placards that read, "No more puppets. No more betrayal." Meanwhile, inside the French embassy in Abuja, damage control began, but it was too late that a spokesperson issued a vague, non-committal statement. "We respect the sovereignty of all African nations and are unaware of any such alleged operation." But no one believed it. The timing. The coordination. The silence from Tinubu's office. The mounting contradictions. It was no longer a question of, if something had been attempted, it was a question of how many times such things had succeeded before this. And yet, amidst the rage, something more profound stirred, hope. Because for once, a trap hadn't worked, for once, a leader had not walked in blind. For once, the receipts had arrived before the apology. In Lagos, a group of university students gathered outside an ECOWAS compound holding signs. Not in our name. We are Africans first, not agents of the West. In Mali, a graffiti mural appeared overnight, a lion sitting calmly beside a torn puppet string, under which was scrawled, "We saw. We heard. We rise." Even in the corridors of Nigerian parliament, whispers began to shift. One senator, caught off mic, was heard saying, "This Traore broadcast has changed everything. We underestimated the man. And now we've overexposed ourselves." For the African public, the moment had transcended politics. This was no longer about Burkina Faso, or even France. It was about ownership. Of narratives. Of sovereignty. Of dignity. Because when the world expected silence, Traore delivered testimony. When they expected confusion, he responded with precision. And when they hoped for shame, he brought proof and pride. As the broadcast ended, President Traore didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice, that he simply said, "This is not the end of something. This is the beginning. From today, let every leader understand, Africa is awake. And we no longer negotiate with chains." The transmission faded. But the fire it lit spread across a continent. Not one born of fury alone, but of awakening, and in that moment, the message was clear. We do not ask for permission to exist, that we do not request approval to lead, that we are not waiting to be invited to the table, that we are rebuilding it, with our hands. And once again, it was Ibrahim Traoré, not in exile, not in custody, but in the heart of his homeland, who reminded the world that lions do not ask for mercy, they shape the silence, until it listens. It was a statement of defiance. But more than that, it was a reminder to the world, and to Africa itself, of a truth we once knew but forgot in the halls of borrowed parliaments and under the flags of donor conferences. Africa was never meant to kneel. I did not survive their plot to humiliate them. I survived it to teach us. Teach us that power is not measured in bodyguards, entourages, or foreign investments, that it is measured in clarity. In preparedness. In the discipline to not strike first, but to see everything. That it is measured in knowing when to speak, and when to let the silence do the talking. I was never the loudest in the room, but I was the one who refused to be silenced. What I meant to say is this. 1. To the African people, you are the authority. I do not serve foreign interests, that I do not negotiate behind your backs, that I do not wear a uniform to look powerful, I wear it to remember the weight of duty. You have been told you are poor. You have been told you are weak. You have been told your future lies in someone else's palm. But they are wrong. Our power has never been in their institutions. It has always been in our unity, in our belief, in the stubborn resilience of our grandmothers and the quiet defiance of our young. When they come offering aid, I ask, where was this help when we were looted? When they offer training, I ask, who trained them to respect us? We are not late to the future. We are simply done waiting. 2. To African leaders, silence is not neutrality. You cannot call yourself a leader while you answer to whispers in Paris. You cannot raise the Pan-African flag in daylight, then sign the betrayal before midnight. Your people are not fools. They feel your hesitation. They see your deals. They know when you speak for them, and when you are reading from a foreign script. When I said, just the two of us, I was testing you, and you failed. Not because you plotted, but because you thought the world would not find out. But it did. And now, they are watching you, not as a president, but as a precedent. Every time you sell your people for political survival, you don't just fall, you pull the entire continent backwards. You were supposed to protect the gate, instead, you became the key. Let my response remind you, Africa will not rise as long as its own leaders hold the leash. 3. To the global powers, we are not yours to manage. You wrote the map. You drew the borders. You built the embassies, planted your banks, installed your friends. And yet, here we are, still standing. You tried to remove me not because I am a threat, but because I am an interruption. An interruption to your carefully orchestrated balance of dependency and debt. An interruption to your foreign language press briefings, where African silence made your lies sound like truth. But now the silence is broken. We are not your experiment. We are not your bargaining chip in global forums. We are not your battlefield for proxy wars, and we are certainly not your colony, no matter how polite your language becomes. What you fear most is not rebellion. It is independence. It is sovereignty that doesn't knock first. It is leaders who do not owe you explanations. Well, get used to it. Because Burkina Faso is not alone. And neither am I. 4. To the youth of Africa, the time has come. I did not do this for applause. I did it so that when you rise, whether as teachers, doctors, farmers, musicians, activists, or even presidents, you remember this moment. Remember that they tried to trap us, and we exposed the blueprint. Remember that you will be told to be realistic. That you will be offered small comforts in exchange for silence, that you will be told that revolution is impractical, idealistic, even dangerous. And I say, they are right. Revolution is dangerous, because it doesn't just threaten systems. It threatens comfort. It threatens submission. It threatens the idea that Africa must always play catch-up. But look around. The internet has no border, the truth now has no time zone. And the fire is already spreading, not in hatred, but in awareness. I did not defeat them. I simply refused to play their game. Now it is your turn to rewrite the rules. What I meant to say is simple. We are no longer asking to be included. We are designing our own circle. We are no longer asking to be understood. We are speaking in a language of results. We are no longer waiting to be rescued. We are rescuing ourselves. They brought the cage. We brought the mirror. And when they looked into it, they saw what they never expected. A continent not afraid. A president not for sale, and a future that does not ask for permission. So I stayed in Ouagadougou, not to hide, but to remind the world. A lion doesn't enter the trap that he waits, and then he rewrites the story. A continent not afraid, a lion who waited. A continent not afraid. A president not for sale. And a future that does not ask for permission. These are not lines for a speech. They are the heartbeat of a continent long misunderstood, long underestimated, and now finally standing at the threshold of something irreversible. Something powerful. Something free. I did not choose to stay in Ouagadougou to hide. I stayed to make a statement, one that would not fit into a soundbite or be watered down into diplomatic niceties. I stayed because the most powerful form of resistance is not always presence, sometimes, it is absence. They expected my arrival. They choreographed it. They prepared the trap with the confidence of those who had set many before. They imagined a leader stepping off a plane, alone, perhaps even flattered by the invitation. They imagined me smiling for the cameras, shaking hands under false pretenses, and sitting quietly in a room where the outcome had already been written. But I had read the script. And I chose not to act in their theater. Because lions do not perform. I did not walk into the trap. I waited. Because that is what lions do. They do not run at the first sound of trouble. They do not roar at every challenge. They listen. They calculate. And when the moment comes, when the hunter grows arrogant and careless, that is when the lion moves. Not in panic, but in purpose. You see, they misunderstood what kind of leader I am. I am not a man who chases microphones. I am not a leader who needs validation from the same hands that once enslaved our people. I do not wear my uniform for show. I wear it to remind myself that leadership is not comfort, it is discipline. When they sent the invitation to Abuja, I read between the lines. I saw the choreography before the curtain lifted. I smelled the blood before the table was set. And I made a choice, not out of fear, but out of foresight. Instead of walking into the jaws of deceit, I sat behind a desk in Ouagadougou. No gold behind me. No flags. No general's information. Just the truth. And the truth, when spoken plainly, has a strength that no military convoy can match. They thought they had cornered me. Instead, I showed the world that they had cornered themselves. They called it diplomacy. But I called it theater. They called it dialogue. But I recognized delay. They called it an invitation. But I saw it for what it was, a carefully constructed trap meant to humiliate not just me, but the voice I represent. Because I do not speak for myself. I speak for the farmer whose land has been leased to strangers. For the mother who lost her son in a war she never voted for. For the student who reads about aid but never sees its benefits. For the child who is taught to respect the flag of a foreign nation before learning the language of their ancestors. When I refused to board that plane, I wasn't just protecting myself. I was protecting the idea that Africa must no longer be predictable. We have been studied, categorized, and forecasted by think tanks and intelligence briefings. They know our debt levels, our mineral reserves, our voting patterns. But they do not know our hearts. They do not know the silence that is rising. They do not know that something is shifting, beneath their radar and beyond their reach. The trap failed. And in its failure, it revealed something deeper. It revealed that the age of secrecy is dying. That the old games, where coups are planned in hotel rooms, where economic coercion is disguised as assistance, no longer go unnoticed. Because this time, we had the proof. We had the recordings. We had the documents. And we had a people ready to listen. I did not need to shout. The evidence spoke for itself. And the continent heard it. In Niamey, they painted murals. In Nairobi, they rewrote songs. In Lagos, they held signs that read, "Not in our name." In Accra, they lit candles. Not in mourning, but in awakening. This is the Africa they feared. Not the one on its knees, begging for investment. But the one on its feet, defining its path. And if I have done nothing else, let it be this. Let it be said that I did not flinch. That when faced with deception, I did not shout, I simply showed the world what had been hidden. They brought the cage. We brought the mirror. And in that mirror, Africa saw itself, not as poor, not as weak, not as a continent to be managed, but as a force that remembers who it is. A force that no longer fits into their model. A force that no longer seeks approval. A force that no longer waits. So yes, I stayed in Ouagadougou. And in doing so, I rewrote the story they thought they had finalized. This story no longer belongs to the planners, the plotters, or the publishers in foreign capitals. It belongs to us. To every African who wakes up and refuses to accept less. To every child who sees hope, not shame, in the color of their skin. To every leader who chooses loyalty to their people over loyalty to power. And to every lion, watching silently, calculating, waiting. Your time is coming. Because lions do not chase approval. They do not beg for respect. They do not need applause to know who they are. They wait. And when the jungle is quiet, they move. Not to roar, but to reclaim what was always theirs. And now, so does Africa.